Hello and bienvenue. I'm your host, Anaïs, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to Her Career, Her Coach, the podcast dedicated to empowering women to build a career they are truly passionate about. Here we meet again, dear listener, for another episode together. And today I'm incredibly humbled and grateful to welcome Jihan, who has kindly accepted my invitation after I heard her sharing her story at London Networking. I think it was earlier this year. So Jihan, I'm really happy that you're here. Welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Fantastic. So let's start with starters. Would that be okay to share a little bit more about you and what you do?
Absolutely. So I work at a company called Samara, which is a company in the IoT space impacting physical operations. And essentially what that means is if you think about the companies powering our economy in food and beverage, transportation and warehousing, government and education, all of those sort of physical pieces that are being moved around, whether it's through a big truck or an asset like a tractor or trailer. Those are the types of things that we track, or our technology allows fleet managers and operators to track to ensure that they're getting real-time data on how those things are operating in the world. And I work specifically in our people team. So within that capacity, it's really about enabling our employees to have incredible workplace experiences that they can operate based on trust and live our values, such as adopting a growth mindset, winning as a team, focusing on the success of our customers. That really drives them to be able to do their best work every day. So that's the kind of things that I get to work on. A very fun and fulfilling job, and I'm very, very grateful to do it.
I love it so much that feels like I want to unpack with you. So I'll start with where my head went first, which is literally what you said at the end. The fact that you enjoy what you're doing and it's fulfilling. I love that. What would you say is the things that you enjoy the most about what you're doing?
Absolutely. So I'm a people person. It'd be hard to do this job if you weren't interested and curious about people. People are so unique. So we'll have different reactions or ways in which that we approach a problem or ways in which we can solve a problem. And those different perspectives, a shout out there to diversity, equity, inclusion, of course, but really just at the very core of it, just being a human being that lends you to a whole host of different kind of interactions that you can have. And so when you do that with the shared purpose of any organization, I think that really enables you or gives you the opportunity to do amazing things together. And so for me, I love the idea of and the challenge of being able to create the environments and nurture the environments that ensure that people can do just that. And I think that there's a lot behind, creating spaces of trust, ensuring that from the top to the bottom of the organization, that people are role modeling the behaviors and values we deem to be important to us, and being able to have coaching and accountability conversations along the way, right? We all make mistakes. We all can sort of stumble over our feet sometimes, but being open to that feedback and open to learn and grow is a really important thing. Like none of us are come out of the womb perfect, and we all have opportunities to learn and grow with anything that comes in front of us. And I think seeing human beings through that lens, that we are innately built for connection, that we are innately curious and creative, and that we can really leverage all of those things about who we are to create incredible things.
This is exactly why I don't drink coffee. I mean, this is literally the kind of conversation I have on a daily basis with my clients, but from an external perspective, in the sense that they are actively looking for a new role, or they're questioning, whether or not this is the right environment where they are right now. And just hearing your perspective, hearing your philosophy, if I can put it this way, in terms of how do you actually focus on the fact that pretty much everyone is different, and it's also okay to make mistakes along the way, but essentially it's about making sure that you provide, the right support, and you make sure that people feel they are supported wherever they need to go. I just love it. Have you always known that this is what you were meant to do with your career? And I'm sorry if we're skipping ahead, because I know we're going to dive more into like your achievements and your challenges, but I'm just curious.
I love where you're leading the conversation. Going. No, I didn't know that this is where I wanted to go with my career originally. I think, with anything, when you're young, you're in your teens or in your young 20s, you're really in that discovery phase of figuring out who you are as a person, but also where you and your skills and talents can add the most value to the world, as well as you can make money, right? Like there's that concept called ikigai, which is a Japanese phrase for kind of the center of those Venn diagrams to find out where you can achieve all of those things. And I think it took me some time to figure that out. I have sort of in my mind a very clear memory between my husband and myself where we were sat in a conference room at London Business School after we had both moved here from Orlando, Florida. And we were sat in that conference room. He had, a felt tip marker, and we were basically charting out what I wanted my career to be. At that time, I had had some prior career experiences in project management and started kind of a role within HR or employee support. But I was very much still unsure what I wanted to do with all of those things, those skills, those experiences that I've had. And it really kind of came down to a fork in the road of what I could do from that point forward. And this was about 10 years ago now. Mm-hmm. And I could have either gone through a pathway of becoming a psychotherapist or counselor, which is something that I'm very passionate as well. You'll see that I got a postgraduate degree in this topic. Or, I could go into HR and essentially kind of impact, not just in one-on-one settings and kind of influence how people kind of observe change for themselves and enact change for themselves to live a better life independently or individually, but being able to kind of impact that at scale, meaning through multiple people, through multiple opportunities within an organizational environment. And as I said before, I'm a people person, right? I'm an extrovert by nature. And I think for me, that is what really fueled me to go down the HR path, because I just know that about myself. Now, I will caveat that by saying that HR back then and even HR now still has such a bad rap for being kind of the police organization, for pushing policy and paper. And I knew from the very beginning that that was not the kind of organization or the kind of HR I ever wanted to do ever in my life. My role either now or sometime in the future becomes that, I will look for another opportunity. But I really believed at that time that organizations had real power in being able to, really enlist those talents that I talked about, those capabilities within human beings, I think are within all of us. We all are looking for organizations that, allow us to fail safely and honorably. Organizations where there are leaders who can sort of, create a vision and kind of chart out those stepway paths to help us get there and meet those goals. To work with colleagues who are just as curious and kind and, values-based and action-focused as you are. I just really believed in the power of organizations to do that. And the kind of organizations that were really leading on that at the time were Silicon Valley-based organizations. Now, coming from a small town in Orlando, Florida, and then now being in London, I had no idea how I was going to make it there. But lo and behold, through the power of networking, one of the women that was in, not necessarily in my husband's class, but the year before him, she and I played touch rugby together of all things. And she connected me with the people leaders at her prior organization. And that's where we began the conversations to, kind of start out my HR career, eventually moved to Silicon Valley for a year and a half, eventually then move with that company back to London where I am today. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. A little bit of a snapshot of very many chapter headings kind of talked about in one go.
Absolutely. And obviously definitely keen to dive into the achievements, challenges side of things. So I'm sure some of it is probably going to come up again. The one thing I'd love to ask from your perspective from these past 10 years as well, including pandemic and all of these things, what would you have said that is the one or maybe a couple of things that have changed in terms of people, in terms of their needs, in terms of what's happening in the workplace? If you were to say the 2 or 3 major things that I've actually seen evolved this past 10 years.
Absolutely. I would say the one thing that's really stood out is this need for employees to have flexibility in their lives. That I would say has never changed regardless of the pandemic. But with the pandemic has really highlighted the fact that we can do that we can live and work in our lives flexibly to, one, achieve great things together within our working lives, but then also being able to achieve great things in our personal lives and have those things actually live in harmony with one another. Now, it's not to say that there aren't challenges with that, with respect to, new challenges in the sense of having the right boundaries to be able to, turn off from work. You might have a crying child who, needs attention and love in that moment, or just to be able to sign off at a time to take care of bedtime or to take care of, going to the gym or whatever it is that powers your personal well-being, to then when work and life are sort of under the same roof, that can be very difficult to do. But I would say one thing that's really cried out and has changed about the world of work today is openness and welcome, this warm welcome to flexibility. And I think we're going to see far more of that in the years to come too.
Good. For anyone who dubbed out, I'm just going to play the recording. I'm going to say, Jihan said, we're going to see more of these. Don't worry. It's coming in. It's coming in. Whether some organization resisted or not, it is coming in. Okay, great. Anything else that you want to share before we looked at what have been your top 3 career achievements?
Oh, I think I'm ready. Let's do
it. I mean, I feel like everything that you shared so far should definitely be part of the, achievement side of things, but I'm going to let you be the judge, obviously, of what would you say have been your top 3?
Yeah, so I would say one of those things, and there's no particular order to this, has been working in sort of 2 geographies, right? Working in the US versus working in the UK or in Europe. You really have an appreciation for the differences of each of those locations. I know a lot of people ask me, oh my goodness, why did you move from the US to the UK? What could be so bad? And, I have varying answers to that for various different things. And there's a reason why we love living in the UK. But I know that it's not all roses and rainbows here either. But, what I do love about having kind of that international experience and that global lens that I apply to things is that you can be sort of a translator between either managers that are managing people in both of those locations or those 2 different geographies to employees who are trying to kind of understand how it is that they can break into opportunities in one location or another, or just being able to have that cultural experience or background. I think that diversity is such an important and powerful part of embracing within any organization, and being able to kind of having lived in both worlds, having that appreciation, I think really deepens my experience and my capabilities as a professional. The second piece is having worked at 2 companies now that have, grown from, being kind of seedling organizations to now going public. So having had both of those experiences where companies have been recognized by the external markets as, being incredibly valuable in the ways in which we, power our economy or add value to the world, like it's incredibly motivating and, achievements that I'm proud of. I think in a lot of ways, I was lucky to know great people to have offered me these opportunities to work at these organizations. I would say, there's a bit of hard work in there too, of course. But, having had those experiences are, I think, pretty rare in someone's career, and certainly not, beyond me to realize just how special that is. And then I would say sort of the third is just kind of the ongoing capability of just being able to have so many incredible people to learn from at various stages of my career. So I've been really lucky to have amazing bosses and amazing mentors and coaches. And I would say particularly in my current role right now, I look around and above me and, I have the best teachers. And I don't know if that's necessarily a career achievement that I've been able to afford, but I would say, it's something that I'm incredibly grateful and I do see as fuels my further career growth in the future. And I tell these folks every day, it's like, you can never retire, because the moment that I don't know what I'm going to do with myself, and just speaks to how incredible these individuals are and how much I learn from them from every interaction. And just so grateful to be able to work in an organization that attracts that kind of talent and gives me the opportunity to learn and grow from them.
And I think you've just mentioned that at the very end here, but would you say those people are part of your day-to-day life, as in those are the people that you work with? Would you say it's actually a mix, as in you do have a support network from your various experiences that are still, with you to this day? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say every mentor or boss that I've worked with, I know that I could pick up the phone to any time and just, pick their brain on an issue, or just say, hey, would love to catch up, for a few minutes and just see how your life's going. Or if I'm in the areas that they work and live in, just pop over and either go for a walk, have a coffee, dinner, whatever it is, and that's the power of the network, right? The other 100%. Piece of it really, those individuals who I do get to work with day in and day out. And that's why I feel so lucky, is that I literally have, opportunities every day to learn from them. And that we have a value called Adopt a Growth Mindset, taken from Carol Dweck's book, Research, that, learning is something that happens. Like we live and breathe it, whether we recognize it or not. And that failure or mistakes or risks that we take that don't pan out the way that we think or we thought they would have so much opportunity to teach us more than the things that, well. And I think for me, it's not necessarily like, me failing or doing something wrong, but it's more like, hey, I have an opportunity to test my hypothesis, test my thinking on it. And maybe it's just made, my philosophy of how I operate as a people person or as just a professional 1% or 0.5% better. It's that process, kind of just being open to, letting go of whatever perspectives I have to embrace something new and even more kind of akin to what it is that I want to see in the world. And then how I can influence that is so invaluable to me.
It's really interesting what you said, because full disclosure, I wanted to make sure I've got this right, but it's coming from Jim Rohn, who said that we are the average of the 5 people we spend the most time with. And like you said, right, the fact that you are in your day-to-day, but even additionally to your day-to-day, in a position to have those conversations, have similar values, which are obviously the ones of the company, but that does resonate to you as well as a personal level with other people, and have those productive, insightful conversation that allows you to incrementally, even though it is by like 0.1% every day, but that's obviously still progressing and learning. I just very much love that. Awesome. Definitely an achievement on its own, because from experience, and I'm not sure if you've seen that, but I'm sure you might have something to add. A lot of people sometimes really feel trapped in an environment, for example, at work, that is not 100% aligned with who they are, but they're just also even more scared to leave that environment and what's next for them. So I feel like the achievement of you being in a position to wake up every day to feel like this is exactly where you're meant to be, what you're meant to do, and being in the right place, 100% is an achievement. It didn't happen by accident. You made those choices. Like you said to me at the beginning, I love the fact that you said, if one day I'm in a position where it's just paperwork and processes and I can't make an impact, then I'm probably going to look out for another company. Like, you're very clear in terms of what needs to happen next, and you've made those, changes and decisions in that direction. So thank you for sharing.
Well, thank you for reflecting on that. I really appreciate it.
I mean, again, I'm just having water, but I'm having the time of my life. I feel like it's a Red Bull right now. All right, let's have a look at it on the other side. I can't wait to hear your wisdom on it. What would you say? Again, you probably are going to have the same approach as the achievement and probably say it's not necessarily in order of importance, and that's absolutely fine. But if I were to ask you, Jihan, what would you say have been your top 3 career challenges? What would it be?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first one, it's such a corny phrase, like, when you can turn your challenges into opportunities, blah, blah. But in a real sense, in a genuine sense, the experience that I had at a previous organization that really spurred me into wanting to explore HR as a career path was working at a company that, really was kind of very process heavy, not very people centric. One day you would wake up and have, an employee who was there yesterday not turn up the next day, or, it was quite harsh in how they dealt with their people practices, and people lived with kind of an underlying or like a small kind of, small range of anxiety at the prospect of potentially losing their job if they were not meeting someone's expectations of what success looked like. And, again, like those are things that are forming and shaping of someone's career. But I think for me, it really fueled this desire to see and be a part of an organization that, could treat people with the respect and dignity that they deserve, whether they are performing well or if they are not working out for the organization. And that's certainly what we try to aim to do at Samsara. And, throughout my career, the organizations that I impact and support, being able to enable and impact that. I would say the other career challenge was kind of when I joined HR, I joined in an operations role. And I don't want to say it's necessarily it's certainly not a bad thing. I think it's actually, there's a lot of value in being able to know the day-to-day operations, the ins and outs of people inputs and what actually goes into the data that we then report out to track trends and themes. it certainly took time for me to move out from just kind of the day-to-day operations and then doing the role that I do now, which is essentially an HR business partner or people partner that we call in our space, to really sort of influence organizations from a strategic point of view to say, hey, how are we looking at sort of our organizational design? How are we looking at talent development as a whole? How are we looking at kind of these attrition trends that we're seeing? Kind of having conversations that really allow you to have a broader narrative of the health of the organization, and then being able to enact changes that really impact that in a positive way. Those are obviously different skill sets and different opportunities to enable change. But it certainly, I knew that was my sort of end goal, and it took some time to actually get there. And I think, working in organizations where you are kind of the only person here. And thankfully, I'm grateful to be on a team of 4 now. You do kind of get pulled into kind of the day-to-day operations, and whilst, all the things that you would really love to do and, your heart gets excited about has to wait. I would say the third, and the one that really hits home in my heart, was during the pandemic. We unfortunately had to let go about 40% of our employee population here in EMEA.
Wow.
Yeah, it was very painful. And as you can imagine, a company, about 200 people in the region, all office-based, all having joined in the last year or two, we became quite close. And I was involved in everybody's onboarding to some extent. Either I met them the first day or was supporting them through various other enablement opportunities. We were grabbing lunch together, creating community together. You get to know these people on a very personal level. Of course you do. And you care very deeply about them. And then sort of 48 hours before we had to notify everyone, I was notified that's what we had to do. And so, that was a very painful process for me. And I think obviously in this world of the tech industry really, really struggling in these economic times, layoffs feels like we're starting to get a bit desensitized to them now because they're happening so frequently. But every single one that happens is not to be taken lightly, right? These are livelihoods that are impacted. These are families that are being impacted. There's so much emotional weight and burden placed on not just the individuals whose roles are impacted, but all of those who are impacted by that role. So whether their job is safe or not, everyone is impacted. And it's a really difficult time for any organization to walk through and work through. And I would say that was probably, we talk in kind of psychology speak, the dark night of the soul. And I would say that was definitely a dark night of the soul in my career. And, certainly something that I think we were talking about it even at lunch today is I never want to go through any one of those things again. I mean, of course, in HR, you're bound to do it at least once. I really hope I never have to do it again. And I'm grateful that Samara is in a position where we're quite economically stable and healthy to weather this storm. And so I feel very blessed in that sense. But yeah, it's really hard. And, your relationships with those individuals has forever been changed after that moment. And, in some ways, hard to recover or don't recover at all. So very challenging to go through.
I don't think I've got the right words to say because I can only imagine what you've been through, what these people and the life of these people around them have also, like you're saying, were impacted in that particular time. The one thing I would ask is, how did you navigate? Not necessarily the conversations per se, but just those times, because like you said, you had relationships that were impacted one way or the other. So how did you navigate this period?
Yeah, I would say, it wasn't a straight line by any means. I mean, when you're going through something like this, you're essentially navigating yourself and the organization and these people who've been impacted through a grief process. And for me, I was grieving as a friend. I was grieving as an HR professional. I was grieving as a person. I think there was a good 2 weeks worth where my husband would find me just sort of in the corner of my home office at the time, just shattered and crying and, just really feeling the weight of the decisions we were making and just how difficult and sad it was. And, I think it's one of those things that you really do have to put one foot in front of the other. Some of my trusted people around me, one of my colleagues who I consider one of my best friends in the organization happened to be on our legal team. So he and I were working through this together. He would stay up with me until 11 p.m., 1 a.m., when we would have to sort of administer and facilitate, something the following morning. Like the pace at which we had to work and the amount of work that had to, be churned out during this time, it was up to us. Like I was having to produce hours and hours of work in the midst of all of this. And I think there's a grace over it all. I don't know how it necessarily happens. It's quite mysterious in that sense. And there's definitely not a way where I could necessarily piece this all in a nicely neat bow. But, every day you do put one foot in front of the other. There's an aspect of work, not necessarily being a distraction, but a way in which you can kind of channel that energy into something that hopefully becomes positive for the people on the other side, given the circumstances, right? Like we could not keep their jobs, but we could try to make this process as dignified and honorable for them as possible, that we could give them as much clarity in this process, that we could be as transparent as we could be, and that we could fight for the kind of package that we felt was justified given the circumstance. In all of those ways, as hard as it is to go through something like that, I do have peace in my heart of how we went about it. Of course, could learn so much more and very much open to that learnings. But I can sort of rest my head on my pillow each night knowing that we did the best that we could.
With the hand you had been dealt with, I guess that's what we said. Yeah. Just out of curiosity, were you already here, as in on this side of the Atlantic for that, or were you back in the US?
Great question. I was here. So in the UK, you have to go through what's called a collective consultation process. It's quite drawn out. And in every country in Europe, you have to go through a different process. We had to sort of navigate that in the various different countries where people's jobs were impacted. And so, it's quite a lengthy process, but we did it as diligently as we could. I think in answer to your question as well, like I've been based in the UK now more permanently for the last 8 years, having moved here originally in the UK 10 years ago. So there's like that little year and a half in between where I was in California. But yeah, just piecing together my very story and career and life journey. Yeah. So I've been here for the last 8 years and at Samara for the last 4.
And out of curiosity, would you see yourself staying here? Would you see yourself going someplace else? I love what you shared at the beginning, the fact that you have been in a position to have seen sort of like both sides of things, even though this is not as binary as two sides. It's much more complex and detailed than that. But definitely love to know where you want to take this experience next.
Yeah, great question. I think when my husband and I talk about it, and we've said this, I think every year since we've moved back here permanently years ago, like we love it here. I think there was something in my heart always when I lived in California for a brief time that just knew my time in London wasn't done. And when the opportunity came for me to come back here, I was just like, I can't pass this up. This is amazing. And now that we've been here for the last 8 years, again, it's just been incredible. I think we have a life here that we're incredibly proud of. We have Europe kind of in our backyard to go travel to affordably anytime we want.
Yep.
We just really enjoy Europe so much. And I think London is one of those cities that always captures your heart and your imagination, regardless of how many times you walk Thames and how many times you pop up to Piccadilly Circus or, Westminster tube stations or Tower Bridge. And you just see these iconic historic places that have had such a role to play in society and history. And that's a kind of feeling that you don't necessarily get in a lot of places in the US, even, the oldest ones. I just really appreciate the depth that this city has to offer and just the ever evolving kind of landscape that it is as we modernize. It's such a gift to live here. And I think our time horizon is long if it were up to us, for sure.
I love it. You almost made me want to just like take the rest of the day off and just be like, okay, you know what? I'll just follow Jihan's. I'll just go through Westminster, go through Piccadilly Circus and all of these iconic places. Love it.
It's so charming. Absolutely.
It is. You're right. I mean, as you know, I'm about to go away to Indonesia, but I feel like what you've just shared here is definitely going to stay in the back of my mind, especially when I'll be coming back. I think it's one of those where once you're in it, you very much enjoying it. But once you either go back to where you're coming from originally, let's say to see your family or your home country or whatever it is, and then you're coming back here. I mean, at least that's my feeling after 8+ years is this is home now for a weird feeling because it's not where I've grown up. I don't know. There is something that once you're home, you know you're home, right?
Absolutely. I love that feeling when you get into Heathrow Airport and your shoulders just relax. Just know that, yes, you're back home.
Love it. Well, there we go. It's a home for the both of us. And on that note, I would definitely love to pick your brain as this is the part of the podcast where I want to ask you, and you already shared a lot of really, really valuable tips along the way of sharing your story, but on top of what you've said so far, what would you be recommending for anyone, for any woman as well, who is looking to make the most out of their career? And I know it's a very, very vast and broad topic, but any recommendations that you'd like to share?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I appreciate you sharing that such broad topic. And you did reference, how we met or how we came to be connected was through the women's networking event in January. And what I shared then is still true now. I think being able to lean into kind of, I say this as reflectively and respectfully as I can, taking the opportunity to lean into sort of those painful parts of our life experiences to really kind of glean the learnings that we can from them, as hard as they might be. Those will be some of our biggest teaching moments and some of those like most refining moments. So to give people a little bit of context of what I spoke about in January, and the topic was, doing a personal retrospective. And when I looked back at my year in 2022 and the things that sort of made it quite a tumultuous year for me, what actually got me through it was not what we typically do, which is sort of, hide those things under a rock or a rug and try to just sort of move on with our lives and ignore the fact that they exist. It was actually just saying, no, let me peek under the rug a little bit more and allow myself to lean into, why this happened, what is actually causing pain and struggle in my life. And the first, sort of lead into 2022 was a season of burnout. My life, I've just been kind of put my foot on the gas pedal since I was, 18 years old. And so 20 years on, how there's any sort of fuel left in the tank, I don't know if it's possible. But I certainly hit kind of the fumes at the end of that year. And so leaning into that and saying, okay, well, why did I allow that to happen? Really trying to understand sort of psychologically and emotionally, what are my ties to my work space? What are my ties to my work product and output, the relationships I have in the workplace? And, to summarize it all, it really kind of came down to a sense of worth that I thought, required me to push so hard for so long in order for me to feel worthy in this world. Yeah, really, I don't think that's uncommon for a lot of us to experience, but I think for me, truly being honest with myself about that was what eventually allowed me to be freed from that burden. The second thing that happened was, my husband and I have been trying to grow our family for the last 7 or 8 years to no success, unfortunately. And whether trying by ourselves or getting support through IVF, finally had broken through and managed to fall pregnant in February, but then soon lost the baby in April. So an early miscarriage, which interestingly and unfortunately is a more common phenomenon than sort of our society gives credence to. And, really kind of struggling and wrestling with all of that, not just sort of the grief of, experiencing sort of this break in our struggle and then obviously being heartbroken at our loss, but then kind of the societal aspects of this where, even the people who are closest to me, love me and care about me the most are not able to give me the support that I need and say things that are really harmful and actually hurtful and damaging about, like it'll happen when it's supposed to happen, or be grateful that you did get pregnant, or, maybe what did you eat? What did you do during that time that, that essentially puts blame on me for having not been able to control this outcome. All of those kinds of things that I'm like wrestling with to try and find my little, circle and footing of peace in the midst is it wasn't easy. And, not just that, like my body had to heal, right? Like something that I didn't mention in January was that the process was horrific for me, like physically. Like it's not what they say in articles of like, oh, it's just a heavy bleed. No, I was in the hospital for 3 days. And routine surgery took far longer than expected. And, I really did not know, and this is not to sound dramatic at all. There was a point in time where I wondered, would I survive this? I don't know.
Wow.
And, to even have that thought when all you wanted, out of this process was something so innocent as a child. It just felt like the world was so cruel. I felt like the universe was just playing a terrible game and I was just on the wrong end of a narrative or a story. And so, I think with all that, like, once again, like I said earlier, sort of putting one foot in front of the other when, traumatic experiences happen, surrounding yourself with trusted and good people. I think for me, my faith has been incredibly important in that, right? So having those spaces and environments that allow you to feel and process wholly and, genuinely, to kind of point to, okay, what is actually still true about my life today? And what is still true is that I am incredibly worthy. I am incredibly valuable, that regardless of what's happened in my life, nothing can ever change that. What I still want in growing my family still exists there. It just means that all of this that's happened just means that we've hit several bumps in the road and had a lot of challenges, but it doesn't mean that that door is ever closed. My husband and I still deeply care for each other and actually have learned ways in which we can care even more for each other through this season. Grief does that. Like hard things do that. Like you really do kind of wrestle with what are the coping strategies that we had before, and what's working for us now in this season and what's not working for us. So being able to let go of ways in which we interacted with each other that were no longer serving us, to be able to embrace something new. Like there's just been a lot of, I think, transformation that's, been possible through this season. As hard as it was, I wouldn't trade it for the world. It's been such a privilege to learn and to grow through this season. And as I say to a lot of people these days, the person that I see in the mirror now is a person that I've been wanting to see for a long time. This is the version of myself that I'm most proud of and most recognize. And if it took these experiences for that to happen, then so be it. And, being able to have opportunities like this to share this with, other women and others who might be going through similar experiences is certainly worth that.
I don't know where to start. I just want to say I'm so sorry. Obviously, I know about this because this is also some of the things that you've shared in January, but just hearing it again, I'm really sorry that you have to go through that. And I'm just incredibly humbled for listening to it, but also listening to how you went through this particular experience. And like you said, it very much is a complete unfortunate situation, yet you've managed to stand on your 2 feet today, talk about this completely honestly, and explaining that actually this is the proudest version of yourself that you've ever been. So definitely not wishing that to anyone whatsoever. But the one thing I would say though is that I feel like the conversation we just had needs to be continued in the sense that we need to talk about these things more, because this is definitely something that happens behind closed doors. Those experiences, for example, miscarriages, to name one, and completely shape and impact people's life, their mindsets, their mental health, physical health, you name it, the list is endless, yet we don't talk much about it. So I'm incredibly humbled that you've opened the conversation today.
Absolutely. It's my joy and pleasure.
It's actually time for us to wrap things up. And I feel like we have to have another follow-up on those conversations. So hopefully we'll have a follow-up on that in the coming month or years, whenever. But I'm incredibly grateful that you came here today. And part of the tradition is for me to ask you one word that would summarize everything we covered today.
Resilience.
Yes, especially after that last part, I don't think there would have been a better word. I mean, yes, here's to resilience.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me.
If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe and share it with anyone you believe would benefit from hearing it. Because as you know, life is too short to feel unfulfilled at work.